Welcome to In Real Time, where we as Heights Church are inviting you in for real conversations about leading people, organizations, and change in the new normal. We're hoping that our real discussions about our church's journey will help you as you reimagine and rebuild yours. Hello and welcome to In Real Time, where we're having real conversations about leading people, organization, and change. And well, we've got a great conversation with you today, but I'm not going to tell you the topic until I do tell you to please hit like, subscribe, and the bell notification so you don't miss one episode as it drops today. So I'm joined by two co-hosts, and before we get into the topic, I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
I'm Jen Yarbrough, one of our associate pastors over administration and restoration ministry.
Look at that. You're already swiveling your chair.
Oh, gosh.
There it
That was
is.
quick.
I love it.
That was
she said
quick.
she wasn't going to do it, but she is
Yep.
already doing it.
Yep, I'm going to
That's
swivel
awesome.
just to make you feel
There
comfortable.
it
Thank
is.
you,
know
Bronson.
what? We're
Anytime.
going to make you feel comfortable.
Anytime.
That's good. That's good.
And my name is Bronson, and I oversee student ministries here at Heights Church. And I
Sweet.
like to always say, if you hear something go boom, it's probably my fault.
Probably is your fault.
Yep.
Yes. So what is our topic for today?
Well, today we're talking about the comparison game.
The comparison
Yeah.
game. Ooh,
Big
that
one.
is
Big, hairy
not
topic.
good. Not
Woo.
good. So when we're talking about the comparison game, I know the reason we're talking about this actually is because we had a comparison event that came up recently, and I don't mean that in a negative way, because comparison, as we're going to find today, is not always bad. Sometimes we often think it is, but it actually isn't, especially for leaders. But we went to this event and we walked in as a staff to this sanctuary, this facility, and we were immediately saying, "Oh, look at that!
That's so
That
cool.
is so great! I want one of those." Or I wish our screen looked like that. Or look at the stage! Look how they did this. And we were really actually bragging on this group and how well they had done with what they were doing with their auditorium. And we were thinking, those are some great ideas.
Right.
And so we were all, like taking notes. I mean, some of us actually wrote some things down. And so because of that, we realized, that's comparison. We are comparing ourselves there. But that's not a bad thing, because comparison can be a good thing. And we as leaders, we just have to admit it right now. And if you're not admitting it to yourself, you're lying to yourself. We all compare. Everybody does this, not just leaders.
Yeah.
Everybody does this. But it doesn't mean that it's always bad.
Right.
So here's my question. When is comparison good? Because it can be good.
Yeah. I think it's good because it brings inspiration. I think whenever you're in a craft and you want to hone your craft, right?
Yeah.
You want to get better at what you're doing.
Yeah.
So when you go somewhere, you can be teachable and ask yourself, okay, I'm doing something similar. Is there a way I can grow better?
Yeah.
Can I become more effective about what I am doing? So that's a helpful
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, and I love that, because I think that's really what we were as a team saying. Look, man, the tools that they have to work with here, we would love to work with those tools as well. We think we could be more effective.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's really good, because as leaders, we are always looking for a way to get better. At least we should be. We know that we haven't arrived. In this team's auditorium that we went to, this other church, they had not arrived. This is just what they were doing. And they were doing it because they, compared to what they had, said, hey, let's make some upgrades. Let's do some things that are different. So that's a good thing. And I'm wondering about this whole idea then of comparison. How does it help us to innovate? Because really, and that's not always a word that's used with church, but it really should be. How does comparison help us innovate as church leaders?
Yeah, and when I think about how does it help us innovate, I think about when is a good time for comparison, and it's when it's challenging you to get better. And so when we talk about innovating and comparison, when you're seeing something, you're taking inspiration from it.
Oh, that's good.
And then
Yeah.
how can I make this our own? And maybe how can it function even better for our place here? I'm not thinking about overall and everybody else. I'm thinking about independently our own space, because that's really how we innovate. We innovate to be better for us.
Yeah.
And sometimes when we innovate and innovate well, it affects even more people.
Yeah.
And so that's really when I think about innovation, and I'm thinking about comparison is like, when is it an appropriate time, or how do I say this? When I am comparing, is it for a positive or for a negative on myself?
Yeah. No, that's a good thing. And that really goes to that. When does comparison cross the line, excuse me, into something that is not good for us at all? So that's important. And I think for this conversation, it's very important that we recognize that to compare, when we compare even ministry descriptions or roles in a church, or what one church would have over another church, it is never, in my experience, it's never been apples to apples, because there is no situation that it's exactly the same. I mean, okay, it's a church, I get that, but they come in all shapes and sizes.
Yeah.
They could be board-led, pastor-led, combination of those. They could have a healthy culture, an unhealthy culture. It could be the first day of the new culture being built, or it could be 10 years into that. But same size, same color building on the outside. They could be next door to each other. They can be so different.
Yeah.
But we don't see those right away, right? When we start comparing, we think, oh, okay, well, they have this size of a building, or this many seats in their auditorium, or they have that kind of a restoration ministry. We make assumptions immediately about that. Can you guys talk to me a little bit about that, and why it really isn't apples to apples when we're talking about comparisons from one organization to another, and why that isn't a good way to look at it?
Yeah, I would just say that you have to make sure you know what God has called you to do as the lead pastor, of course, but then it's top down. So if you know what God has called you specifically to do, there's so many felt needs out there, right?
Yeah.
So you're there to meet specific felt needs, maybe to attract a certain demographic. Maybe you're in a geographical location that is lower income, higher income, whatever it is. So you don't want to all be the same. We don't want cookie cutter churches out there.
No, we don't need those.
We have to be places of variety so that people who are full of variety can find the right fit for them. And so I think that's where it can be helpful to recognize it's not apples to apples.
Yeah.
And we have to know who God is calling us to be.
Yeah.
You used a really good word earlier. Can't remember what it was.
Innovate?
Yeah. Maybe it was innovate. It's a good word, innovate.
All right. Well, if you think of it, bring it back out. Okay. How about let's talk about, when does comparison cross the line into not good? It's a bad spot. And we don't always maybe know where that line is, but it's definitely on the other side. It's not good. So let's talk about that part of comparison, because that's definitely a reality for us in ministry or leaders.
Yeah.
Definitely. And just as people.
Yeah. I think for me, I can be able to identify early on when it's crossing the line, when I'm hearing the tone of the thought or how I'm saying something. If what I'm saying sounds more belittling out loud, or even when I'm thinking or comparing, it's probably not something that the Lord is really wanting to do in me.
Yeah.
I remember being younger in ministry early on. I think I was about 22, and I would go to different young adults events, young pastor events, and I would sit there and see how far these other pastors had gone and people that I knew, and I would have these thoughts of like, well, how come I don't feel like I'm there yet? How come maybe I'm not married yet, or have a kid, or own a house, whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
And these are more personal things, but I could hear a specific style of voice or thought in my head. And that's when I knew I'm not comparing to get better. I'm comparing, and it's making me worse. And what's going to come of that is nothing that will glorify God, for one, or challenge me to get better. It's just going to keep pushing me down. So for me, that's a big one. Is I can hear it by the tone of the thought or the tone of the comparison of it's starting to cross the line, Bronson.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good. I think that's a great example. Did you have something you wanted to share about that?
Yeah, I think for me it's similar. If it's tearing me down or building me up too much. So like when we look at something and use that as our barometer for our value, I'm either going to go one way or the other. I'm either going to feel less than and not good enough, or I'm going to feel prideful and arrogant and think, oh man, I'm so much better than they are. So it's not a good scenario on either side of it. And that's where the bad comparison comes in. It's not helpful. It reminds me of when at one point in my ministry, I realized that I was comparing myself and the way I'm wired as an introvert to all of the extroverts that tend to be the majority that I've been on in church staffs. They're the outgoing, exuberant, high energy. They're going to be the one that gets on stage and creates a lot of audience response and all of that. And the ones that seem to be the most friendly or have the most friends or touch base with the most amount of people. And I'm an introvert, and that's not how I roll at all. And so there was this pressure I was putting on myself because I was comparing myself. And I had decided, well, I'm not a good enough Jesus follower because I'm not all about people. And Jesus was all about people, wasn't he?
Yes. I think that's very true.
But then I realized what was happening was I was just different. So it was realizing this is not apples to apples. This is them being wired the way they are for a specific reason and calling, and I'm wired the way I am for a specific reason and calling. And my way of doing ministry as an introvert is not less than an extrovert's way of doing ministry. It's going to look different. And I was just telling you, it's like Sunday mornings, I come and I know I'm going to have way more side one-on-one conversations with people in the corner as I go down the hallway. I might grab them, sit and chat for 5 or 10 minutes. And they're going to end up telling me a longer story. But, that's an opportunity for me to say, hey, let me pray with you. And that's just how God has affirmed, how I can do ministry as an introvert.
And your 10-minute conversation is probably going to be 8 minutes longer than the extrovert would have had. And that person needed a 10-minute conversation, not a 2.
There you go. See, God knows. God needs us all.
Absolutely. Not everything it's not the whole. It's just part.
Yes, that's right.
We need extroverts. We need introverts.
Yes, we do.
And do you know that actually there's been studies done? Did you know that most CEOs are not extroverts? They're actually introverts.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that idea that charismatic leaders are always the one who win the day, that's not actually true. There's many other factors that are both introvert and extrovert that would run would choose success there.
Yeah, right. Well, it's a misperception I had. That's all what it is.
Yeah. So that's good news.
Yeah. Yay.
Well, we love you the way you are. I can't believe that you would think that you're not a less than Jesus follower, because on most everybody's list, you would be like at the top of that list. So
thank you.
That's awesome. That's good. That's good.
I did have one more thought when comparison starts to go over the line. It's when it starts to take you away from the main thing. Like when you start to give so much time because you see something that someone else is doing, and it's starting to now take away from your actual goals. That's when it's crossing the line. And I think oftentimes social media, as good as it can be and a big of a tool it can be, can also be the best tool for the enemy, because
Yeah.
people naturally compare one another.
Yeah.
And there have been plenty of times where I would see, or teams that I were on would look at something and compare everything we do to this highlight reel.
Yeah.
And it would make us feel less than, not able to innovate, and
Yeah.
it would take away all the momentum of what God was actually doing.
Yeah.
And so when that comparison starts to pull you away from what you're supposed to be doing and what God actually has for you, I think it's safe to say, cross the line.
Yeah, I think that's good. I know when we were talking about this a little before, that one of the thoughts that came up, and I definitely think this is where this needs to go to, is really if comparison's not where our focus should be, so we can look at it to help us innovate, but it's not where our focus should be. Our focus really is more on what has God given you. And so if you look at the parable of the talents, he gave one talent, another 2 talents, another 5 talents. But the one with 2 talents who was wildly successful, doubled to 4 talents, didn't get there because that person was comparing themselves to the one with 5 talents.
That's right.
It's because they just doubled down and said, you gave me 2, I'm going to steward this amazingly well, and here you go. There's 4 talents. The person with 1 talent said, well, there's no way I can do much with this. And so that comparison was, you didn't give me much, or I can't double it like the other ones did. Therefore, I'm just going to bury it. I'm not going to do anything. Well, that comparison destroyed that person.
That's right.
And they literally had it taken away from them and given to the other ones. And so that whole comparison game is terrible. But what the landowner wanted them to do in the parable was just steward well whatever it is you have. 1, 2, or 5.
Yes.
And so I think for all of us, we need to just say, I want to steward well what I have. So when we walk into that big auditorium and we say, wow, someday, if we're wildly successful and we make a huge kingdom impact, maybe we'll have a screen like that too. But you know what? The apostles didn't need a screen to turn the world upside
did not.
down
That's
with the
right.
gospel of Jesus Christ.
That's right.
And as much as I want those tools as well, they're fun to have and
Oh, for
and all
sure.
that kind of thing. But you know what? That's not what wins people's hearts.
No.
And there's
true.
a whole lot of other really valuable pieces that are in our hands that God has already put there that are going to be way ahead of any sort of a big screen.
It might even get you into problems that you guys really, as or teams, are not really ready to handle yet. Like if you want more and more, you try to force yourself in that place.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe we should do a podcast about solving problems and stuff like that. But just something we should go over.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Hey, there's a reason I was only given 1 talent and not 5.
Exactly.
He knew I couldn't handle 5.
Exactly.
I would have completely imploded with 5. But I can handle my 1.
Yep.
And I'm going to do a good job, and I'm going to learn what I need to here with my 1.
Absolutely.
But the other analogy I think we talked about was a sports team. There are expectations with sports team. We all know if they're rebuilding year 1, rebuilding year 3, or if they're midway through the rebuilding process of maybe like a 5-year rebuild, or they're at the year where they're supposed to win it all, right? Everybody knows it's like, oh yeah, these teams here, and we actually have those kind of expectations. If they get into the playoffs, they'll exceed expectations. They're not supposed to get there for another 2 years. Wow. And so you look at that and you go, okay, that's where we should be. Let's be realistic. A church plant is not the same thing, even if it's the same size. Even if it's the same size. When we planted our church, we were instantly 500 people on like the month of our grand opening.
Yeah.
Well, we weren't like every other 500 person church.
No.
We didn't know any of those people.
Right.
They're all brand new and they didn't know us.
Yeah.
Right.
Completely different scenario going on with that. So it's not apples to apples.
No.
The numbers, they mean something, but that's, they don't mean everything. There's a lot more there. So I think all those things need to be put in to the mix as we're making these comparisons. And what I'm hearing us say is, hey, comparison can be good if it helps you innovate. It could be bad if it's making you feel less than. I'll be honest with you. It's one of the reasons I just am off social media.
Yeah.
I guess I'm weak.
That makes sense.
I'm fine. I'll admit it. I can't handle it. I just don't want my mind being taken off on other people's best days when I'm having a bad day. It does. It gets to me. And I'm just thinking to myself, I one day just said, why am I doing this? I am now thinking about things that I don't need to be thinking about. So I'm going to stop thinking about those and let this, I don't want this directing my thoughts. So that's a comparison game. And that's one of the major pitfalls with social media. And yes, it happens with churches, organizations of all kinds. So anyway, so those are good things. And I think when it comes to the challenge, what we're really talking about is just steward well what God has put in your hands. And don't let it slip into those wrong motives where it's starting to hurt you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nobody has to be the loser whenever there's a comparison.
No.
That's when we know we're getting into the wrong spots.
Yeah.
Anything else you guys want to say about comparison?
Nope, love it.
We did it.
All right. Thank you, too, for joining me today for a real conversation about leading people, organization, and change. And I know you liked this episode, so please hit the like and the subscribe button and also the bell notification so you don't miss one episode. And we will see you next time in real time.